Alright, so we are going to UV map this mesh. This is, a lot of people are afraid of UV mapping. Unless it's a really complicated mesh, there's no reason to be afraid of UV mapping. So what we're going to do is we are going to, at least for this brick, I figured out the path I want it to go on. I'll hold Shift Alt and just edge loop select this entire thing. I'm going to do the same thing for this side because it's nearly identical. Alright, so now I have these two edge loops selected, and we are going to mark the seam. Boom. And they're highlighted in red. So say if you mark something that you don't want to mark, say if I'm like out here and I accidentally click mark seam, then that's just going to cut a big ol' hole open in our mesh. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to just select that. I'm going to clear seam. That's how you get rid of seams. So with that, I'm going to do the rest of these. So let's go ahead and select this little bit. I think that's the right one. Yeah, I think that'll work. And then select this one. Spin around. If you ever happen to get lost, or it's just not rotating correctly like it is now, just click period, and it'll help center quite a bit. Maybe not in this instance because it focuses on your selection, so my selection is currently not representative of where I want this to focus. So let's get up here. Now let's do this one. Oops. That. Bam. So now I have all those selected, and let's mark the seam. Now we have all our seams, and it looks pretty nice. So let's go ahead and go up here to our default, go over to UV editing. This is the fun part. I don't want to see through the mesh, thank you. If you want to see through the mesh, you can click this little button right next to these, and it'll allow you to see through the mesh, or unsee through the mesh. Now what we're going to do is we are going to press A to select all, then we're going to select U and unwrap. Oh, looks like we messed up on something, or I messed up on something. So what we're going to do is we are going to tab into back into object mode. If you noticed here on scale, that the scale is not all one, which is a huge problem. We cannot UV unwrap a mesh as scale that's different. What we're going to do is we're going to press Control A and then scale. And now our scale evens out, and we should be good to UV unwrap. So go back into edit mode and press U, unwrap. You'll notice it's a lot nicer. So at this point, what we're going to do, so there's no overlap, and there's going to be, we don't want it to be too close to each other because it will be really hard to paint in Photoshop or a lot of programs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select L to select a island, and then G to move it. I'm just going to rearrange these to give some more space between them. And L, can I shift L? Oh yeah, look at that. Scale this down just a tippy tad. And generally speaking, you're going to want to use all this space in here without overlapping. You also don't want to go out of these bounds, these boxes, because this square repeats on each side indefinitely. So if I were to move this over to here, this end would come into this end right here and overlap this part of the mesh. So we don't want to do that. We want to be good with our meshes. So that looks like enough space. There's a lot of wasted space, but it's not a big deal for a tutorial. Generally, you're going to want to practice and practice and practice to make sure you fit everything as tight as possible into this space. It's incredibly important to not waste UV space. I'm not being a good example, but I cannot stress the importance of using all your UV space enough. Alright, so back to the tutorial. Let's go ahead and let's make sure our mesh looks alright with this with a texture. Make sure there's no stretching. I'm going to go down here and click New, and let's go and change this to a UV grid. Change this to 2048 by 2048. So that's our texture size. Not a huge deal, but it'll just allow us to see it better. What we're going to do is we're going to come back over here, and we're going to click on this and go to textured mode. What you'll notice is our object is now textured. What we can actually do is we can bring in textures. Once we're done making textures, we can bring them in and display them here just by importing an image. I'm not sure if I'm going to show that, because all I really want to do is make sure that the texture isn't stretching. What we want to make sure is that these cubes are not stretching, and I see a little bit of it, but for the most part it looks like the UVs are well preserved based on my unwrapping. And these are the seams. So what we're going to see here is where textures do not line up properly. This is where mesh painting can really come in handy, because when you actually paint the mesh in 3D view, seams become invisible, and that's what's really handy about doing that. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial because it's a little bit more complex, but I think I'm gonna do another tutorial on that. So with that being done, we know our UVs are good, and our UVs automatically save to our mesh. So what we're gonna want to do is, first, before we do anything else, we're gonna want to save or export our UVs to Blender Exports, Brick, UVs. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we will have no idea in Photoshop where the different parts of this mesh are. Right now I now know, or I will know, because I have that image of where our UVs are. So our mesh is good. UVs automatically saved to the mesh data, so you don't have to worry about saving this out separately or anything. So let's go ahead and tab back into object mode. Let's go back to default, and if you really want to see the texture again, go to textured, but I don't care. Solid. I save a lot too often. I'm going to export this as an OBJ. I'm going to call this low poly. So LP brick. Export as an OBJ. Now, with that being done, I'm going to call this tutorial the end, and we'll be back to bake out the different maps in XNormal. See you guys then.